Hi everyone, today we are talking about subtraction of integers and the absolute value of the difference. So subtraction is the reverse process of addition, and you can think about on the number line the subtraction of a positive number. Since you're subtracting, you're moving to the left. And today we're going to introduce the subtraction of a negative number. So if you think about it, subtraction of a negative number, you'll see that there's two negatives, right? So they essentially cancel each other out because you're kind of taking away your debt, right? So you're now changing yourself to the positive. So just like how adding is moving to the right, taking away a debt or subtracting a negative will also move you to the right. So that's what's new here. You got to think about it being the reverse of the reverse, kind of like in the game of Uno. If you reverse and then reverse again, you go back to your original order, right? So there are two negatives that cancel each other out. Okay, let's take a look at some examples so you can visualize that. We're going to look at these two examples. The first is 3 minus 4. Remember, the first number tells us our starting point, so I'm going to start at 3. And then minus 4, subtract 4, remember subtraction is moving to the left because you're getting lower and lower, less and less in the value. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's how I end up with -1 as my answer. Remember, you can also think about it with your coins. So I have +3, 1, 2, 3, and I'm subtracting 4 is the same as 4 negatives. So if you're somebody like me who likes to use the coin method, this works as well with subtraction. You just have to think about subtraction like a -4. So then these two cancel, and then this one cancels. So you end up with the answer of -1. Okay, so you can either go to the left for subtraction on the number line, or think about subtract 4 as adding -4 coins. Let's take a look at the next problem. The next problem says -2 minus 3. So again, first number is our starting point, -2. Subtract 3, we're going to the left 3 because subtraction gives us smaller numbers. Going to the left gives us less value. 1, 2, 3. So we end up at -5. Using your coin method, you can draw two negatives because it's -2. -3, subtract 3 means we have even more negatives. So that's how we end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 total negatives. So both methods give us that same answer. Nothing's really changed from addition of integers. Still the same rules for positive and negative. All right, but like we said before, you could have now a new situation where we have two negatives right next to each other. Now that's what this is. So if we look at this first problem, -1 minus -3, we see that right there, right? We see those two negatives next to each other. Okay, so all we're going to do is we're going to rewrite this problem because we don't like those two negatives next to each other. We know they cancel out and they kind of reverse each other, right, and become a positive. So let's just go ahead and change it so it doesn't complicate things for us. -1, we keep the same. Minus -3 becomes +3. Remember, it's like taking away a debt, or it's like in the game of Uno when you reverse and then someone reverses back, then they just change things back to how they were before. They're just inverses of each other. So now we have this new problem. I don't even have to look at this. -1 plus 3. So again, we start at -1, that doesn't change. Add 3, 1, 2, 3. So that's how we end up with 2. Okay, with our coin method, 1 negative, 3 positives. The negative and the positive cancel each other out. And that's how we end up, let me choose a different color so you can see that better. That's how we end up with our positive 2 as the answer. In both situations, we have a 2, a positive 2. Okay, so now we move on to the next problem. This is 2 minus negative 2. Remember, these two negatives cancel each other out, so it becomes 2 plus 2. Start at 2, add 2, 1, 2, going to the right, so I end up with 4. Or I have 2 positives, adding another 2 positives, so I end up with 4 positives, with the answer of 4. Last problem, 0 minus negative 5, so I start at 0. Oh, and I have to rewrite this. 0 minus negative 5 is 0 plus 5. So I add 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I end up with the answer 5. 0 plus 5 positives just ends up with 5 positives. So the answer is 5. Not that bad, right? You just have to remember two negatives next to each other cancel each other out. All right. So go ahead now and try this problem. Example 7. Find the values of the following: 12 minus 23, negative 16 minus negative 9, and 0 minus negative 17. Remember to change those two negatives into a positive if you have to before you get started. So pause the video and try it on your own first. Okay, so for 12 minus 23, you should have gotten negative 11. Remember, you got to show your work. For negative 16 negative 16 minus negative 9, I was one step ahead of myself. You changed it to negative 16 plus 9 because those two negatives become a plus. We're going to do that together. And then for C, it's becomes 0 plus 17, which is obviously 17, right? So let me show you negative 16 plus 9 together. Negative 16, I'm drawing 16 negatives. My hand's going to hurt at the end of this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 9 positives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, and that's it. These cancel. So I end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 negatives. Negative 7. Okay, lots to draw. So if you remember your pattern from the previous video, if they're different signs, you can just subtract 16 minus 9 to get 7 and take the sign of the larger digit, which is 16, because we know there's going to be more negatives left over. So let this be a lesson to you. If you haven't remembered the shortcut, do that, or else you're going to be drawing a lot of coins and drawing a long number line. Remember, different signs means you subtract and keep the sign of the larger absolute value or the larger digit when you ignore the sign. Okay? All right, let's move on to this problem. Example 8. Now we're dealing with absolute value. Go ahead and pause the video and try A, B, C, and D on your own first. You can look back in your notes if you want a reminder of what absolute value is. All right, let's start with A. I have the absolute value of negative 3 minus the absolute value of 6. If you remember from our lesson on absolute value, remember that absolute value is the distance from 0. So it's always going to be positive. So we're basically taking these out of the absolute value brackets and we're changing it to a positive 3. We don't touch the minus. That's the actual operation. We can't change that. Can't change a subtraction problem to a addition problem. The absolute value of 6, distance from 0, is going to be 6. So everything coming out of the absolute value brackets just are positive. So this is 3 minus 6. These are different signs because the 3 is technically a positive sign in the front there. So if they're different signs, remember we subtract. 6 minus 3 is 3. The larger value, or the larger digit, is 6. 6 is negative, so we're going to give that a negative answer. A is negative 3. Let's look at B now. B says it wants to find the negative value of the absolute value of negative 3 minus the absolute value of 6. We keep this outside negative because it's outside of the absolute value brackets. Absolute value of negative 3 is a positive 3 because all absolute value is positive. Keep the subtraction, don't touch it. And then the absolute value of 6 is 6. This is negative 3 minus 6 then. So everything outside absolute value brackets we don't touch. We can't touch that. Negative 3 minus 6, they're the same sign. Same sign means we add them together, which is 9, and then we keep the sign. Negative 9, because it's just more negative. 3 negatives and 6 negatives is 9 negatives. Okay, let's take a look at C. C is 4 minus the absolute value of negative 25. Okay, 4 minus stays the same. Then we look at the absolute value of negative 25. It should be positive 25 because remember, absolute value is positive. Do not get tricked by this negative or this minus in the front there. That stays the same. That's the minus. That's the subtraction. 4 minus 25. 4 is technically positive, so they are different signs. Different signs means you subtract. 25 minus 4 is 21. Keep the sign of the larger digit. 25 is the larger digit. It's negative. So the answer is negative 21. For D, we have 12 minus, in parentheses, negative absolute value of negative 8. All right, so we keep the 12 minus the same. Then let's keep that negative inside the parentheses the same. What's the absolute value of negative 8? Well, it's positive 8, but we do have a minus here. And now look at that. We have two negatives together. So some people like to just circle them so that you can see it. And then remember, two negatives become a positive. So 12 plus 8 is our problem now. 12 plus 8 is 20. Same signs, positive, keep it positive. Okay, so that's a little tricky. So basically, if it's not in an absolute value, you keep that negative sign. All right, more on absolute values then. Let's take a look at this problem. Simplify the following. The absolute value of 6 minus 2. We have the absolute value of 2 minus 6. We have the absolute value of 2 minus negative 2. And then the absolute value of negative 2 minus 2. Absolute value of negative 2 minus negative 6. And the absolute value of 6 minus negative 2. So you notice that these problems are very similar. They just reverse them, right? So let's take a look at AI, which is absolute value of 6 minus 2. So we just do the math inside. 6 minus 2 is 4. So the absolute value of 6 minus 4, 6 minus 2 is 4, which is positive 4. Let's try A2. It's the reverse, 2 minus 6 inside the absolute value brackets. Well, 2 minus 6, they're different signs because the sign inside for 2 is technically a positive. So remember, different signs we subtract. 6 minus 2 is 4. It takes a negative sign because the 6 was the bigger digit and it's positive. But now it's the absolute value, so it turns out to be a positive 4. Okay, let's try BI. It is absolute value of 2 minus negative 2. So first I'm going to change this to a plus, 2 plus 2, because I see two negatives right next to each other. So that's the absolute value of 4. Absolute value of 4 is positive 4. Remember, B2 is now reversing them. Absolute value of negative 2 minus 2. For that, they're the same sign, so we add them. 2 plus 2 is 4. Keep the sign, which is negative. So the absolute value of negative 4 is positive 4. Okay, I kind of zoomed through that so that you could see that even if we reverse those numbers, because that's all they did, they, instead of 6 minus 2, they changed it to 2 minus 6. Did they get the same answer at the end? Yeah, they did. They both got 4. Same over here. They, instead of 2 minus negative 2, they put negative 2 minus 2. When they reverse that inside the absolute value, they still get the same answer. So that's all they're saying, okay? Is that you can switch the numbers inside and you will still get the same answer if they are inside absolute value brackets, okay? So I'm going to write that down in my notes, and you should too. So they basically said you can switch integers inside the absolute value, and you'll still get the same, those were both subtraction, difference. That's something very important to know, because normally with subtraction, you don't get the same answer, right? Normally, 6 minus 2, which equals 4, is very different from 2 minus 6, which is negative 4, right? So they're saying for absolute value, it doesn't matter because everything will come out to become positive anyways. So that's something really neat about absolute value, is that it, for subtraction, it doesn't matter the order, while normally it does. So very neat. All right, let's look at an example of that, okay? So for this example, they want to find the distance between negative 49 and 10 decreased by 15. Now remember, distance tells you absolute value. So don't get confused by that. Don't be like, oh my gosh, distance, I don't know how to find that. It just means put it in absolute value brackets, okay? So find the distance. So I already write down absolute value brackets between negative 49 and 10 decreased by 15. Okay, so the distance between these two numbers, I would subtract to find what's in between them, right? If I add them, I figure out the total. So the distance also tells you to subtract to find the distance between them. So they're basically saying here that there's two ways you could do it. One person could do exactly what I did, negative 49 minus 10 inside absolute value brackets minus 15, or another person could switch it up. They could say, hey, I want to put the positive number first, 10 minus negative 49 inside the absolute value brackets minus 15. Both people would get the same answer. They would both get 44 units. Why? Because like we said above, if you're subtracting inside absolute value brackets, it doesn't matter. You're still going to get the same answer. Look, one person got negative 59 inside the absolute value brackets, and then it changed, ended up into positive 59 minus 15 to get 44. The other person ended up with a positive answer because the 10 minus 49 inside the absolute value brackets ended up becoming 10 plus 49 inside the absolute value brackets, because negative and negative is positive. So at the end, they both got 59 minus 15, which is 44 units. Okay, so that's all that lesson is saying, is to not freak out like, oh my gosh, did I do it in the right order? As long as you have it in absolute value brackets, it doesn't matter. So you can have the same work and have the same answer as someone else. Okay, that's all that's saying.